I'm just going to break down exactly what these tariffs are. One is that we know that he has implemented the 25% blanket tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Those took effect this morning. But then he also bumped up tariffs on China from 10% to 20%. And immediately, we've seen some of these countries retaliate with tariffs of their own. China, for example, retaliated by announcing...
The global economy is shifting, and America's allies are making a bold move. You've heard about U.S. debt, but what happens when foreign nations start dumping hundreds of billions in U.S. Treasuries? A massive $390 billion sell-off is shaking up the financial landscape, and Trump's return to office might be fueling the fire. Is this the start of a global financial rebellion? Stay with us until the end as we uncover the full story behind this economic upheaval.
That, in fact, the tariff threat is narrowing to more industry-specific tariffs, and so that appears to have the market quite happy, and thus the multi-point jump there so far this morning. One thing the president is doing later today is announcing an economic development deal down in the state of Louisiana, where they're set to announce about $5.8 billion in steel manufacturing set for that state, driven by Hyundai.
You may have heard that nations like China and Japan hold a significant amount of U.S. debt, but what does that actually mean and why do they do it? When the U.S. government requires funds, it issues Treasury securities, essentially IOUs that guarantee repayment with interest. Other countries purchase these securities, effectively lending money to the U.S. government. But what motivates them to do this? U.S. debt is regarded as one of the safest investments globally. This is because the U.S. government has a strong track record of honoring its financial commitments, and the U.S. dollar is the most widely utilized currency in international trade. For nations seeking a secure place to allocate their funds with minimal risk, U.S. Treasuries are a logical option. Many countries, particularly those that export heavily to the U.S., accumulate large reserves of U.S. dollars. Instead of holding on to this cash, they invest it in U.S. debt, which not only generates interest, but also stabilizes their own currencies and keeps their exports competitively priced. This is a key part of managing their financial reserves.
Breaking this morning, President Trump announcing the U.S. will be levying a secondary tariff on Venezuela beginning on the 2nd of April. The president says, quote, any country that purchases oil and or gas from Venezuela will be forced to pay a tariff of 25% to the United States on any trade they do with our country. In the Post, the president accuses Venezuela of sending criminals to the U.S., including members of the gang Tren de Aragua.
Governments maintain foreign currency reserves as a form of financial security, similar to an emergency fund. U.S. dollars constitute a substantial portion of these reserves. Purchasing U.S. Treasuries allows countries to safeguard their dollar holdings while also earning returns rather than leaving the money idle. In certain cases, acquiring U.S. debt is also about fostering strong economic and political relationships. When nations invest in each other's economies, it aligns their interests and strengthens diplomatic and trade ties. The U.S. Department of the Treasury regularly provides information on the amount of U.S. government debt owned by foreign countries. This data is published monthly in a report known as the Treasury International Capital (TIC) report. The TIC report details which nations are buying or selling U.S. Treasury securities and the total amount each country holds. Prominent holders include China, Japan, the United Kingdom, and several others. This data is typically released in the middle of each month and reflects figures from 2 months prior. For instance, a report published in March usually displays holdings as of January. Just a few days ago, the latest figures were released showing a significant reduction in U.S. Treasury holdings by foreign governments and financial centers between November 2024 and January 2025. This decline signals a broad shift in global investment strategies and a possible reevaluation of U.S. debt as a secure asset. This period witnessed one of the largest sell-offs of U.S. debt by foreign entities in recent history, with nearly all major creditors reducing their exposure. The trend was not limited to a single region, but was seen worldwide. Countries across North America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East pulled back, with total sell-offs exceeding an estimated $390 billion over the 3-month period.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods.
Among the biggest sellers was Brazil, which led the wave by offloading around $55.9 billion in U.S. Treasury holdings. Ireland, a crucial financial hub for multinational corporations and investment firms, followed closely, cutting its holdings by $42 billion. The Cayman Islands, another major offshore financial center, made a significant reduction of $41.2 billion. Canada also made a notable move, shedding $37 billion worth of U.S. bile, a surprising decision given its traditionally strong economic ties with the United States. Norway and India also made considerable reductions, with Norway selling $35.6 billion and India $34.9 billion, respectively. These adjustments suggest a broader strategy among central banks and sovereign funds to rebalance their portfolios, manage currency risks, or lessen reliance on U.S. assets. Even the United Kingdom, historically a major and steady holder of U.S. Treasuries, reduced its holdings by $26.6 billion. Likewise, Singapore trimmed $26.5 billion, while South Korea decreased its exposure by $22 billion, both significant shifts given their long-standing involvement in the U.S. bond market.
What the conservative-leaning Wall Street Journal has called the, quote, dumbest trade war in history, has put Republican elected officials between a rock and a hard place, politically speaking. The problem stemming entirely from their relentless blind loyalty to Donald Trump and all of his inane policies.
Surprisingly, even Japan and China, the two largest foreign holders of U.S. Treasuries, participated in the sell-off. Each reduced their holdings by $7.8 billion. While this may seem minor compared to their total holdings, the fact that both acted simultaneously suggests this was part of a larger financial trend rather than a mere coincidence. Other notable reductions included Belgium, which cut $10.5 billion, Switzerland reducing by $8.3 billion, Luxembourg decreasing by $7.9 billion, and Hong Kong lowering its holdings by $7.4 billion. France sold $2.8 billion in U.S. debt, while Germany, though minimally, reduced its position by $0.5 billion. Even Taiwan, a historically steady holder of U.S. debt, trimmed its position by $5.4 billion. Several factors likely contributed to this widespread liquidation of U.S. debt. One key reason is the current high-interest rate environment in the United States. When interest rates rise, older bonds with lower yields become less attractive, prompting investors to sell off existing securities. At the same time, the strength of the U.S. dollar and fluctuations in global currency markets have led central banks to adjust their reserves and reduce exposure to dollar-denominated assets. Another significant factor is geopolitical uncertainty. In recent years, particularly after the Russia-Ukraine war and rising tensions between the U.S. and China, many countries have become more cautious about over-relying on U.S. assets. Concerns over potential sanctions, asset freezes, and the increasing use of financial restrictions as political tools may be pushing nations to diversify their holdings. As a result, some central banks are reducing their exposure to U.S. Treasuries in favor of gold, euros, or other alternative reserves, a trend often referred to as de-dollarization.
Stood in this administration. This is just another example that he is pretty high up there. Now, this executive order, as you mentioned, we just are reading through it. This president signed it just a few minutes ago off camera. And basically what it does, as you said, it gives more power to DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and it requires, according to this executive order, that each agency head build a sort of technological system, to track every contract, every payment. It also is freezing.
The synchronized pullback from U.S. Treasuries by such a broad range of countries might also indicate growing concerns about the financial trajectory of the United States. With ongoing budget deficits and a rising national debt, some foreign investors may be questioning the long-term sustainability of U.S. borrowing. Additionally, this sell-off took place against the backdrop of a potential political shift, with Donald Trump returning to the political scene, an event that could have further influenced global investment decisions. There may have been additional factors that heightened caution among international investors. Between November 2024 and January 2025, foreign nations sold off nearly $390 billion in U.S. Treasury securities. This significant and coordinated reduction in American debt holdings underscores growing global concerns. While macroeconomic elements like high interest rates and currency fluctuations played a role, the timing of this massive sell-off is no coincidence. It aligns precisely with Donald Trump's return to the U.S. presidency in January 2025. His re-election has revived fears regarding U.S. fiscal stability, geopolitical positioning, and the predictability of American policies.
Look, the reality with President Trump is the only thing he respects is strength. For this president, weakness is a provocation. The only way that we're going to get through this is by showing him that we're not scared, by showing him, hang on a minute, Canada is your biggest market. We're larger than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. I think a lot of Canadians are feeling really angry.
Trump's reinstated America First approach, marked by protectionist policies, bilateral agreements, and a tough stance on global trade and international organizations, has led multiple foreign governments to reassess the risks of holding substantial U.S. debt. During his first term, Trump alarmed both allies and rivals by withdrawing the U.S. from multinational agreements, implementing broad tariffs, especially on China and Europe, and leveraging economic tools like sanctions and financial restrictions as instruments of power. With his return to office, many nations anticipate a resurgence of these unpredictable and often unilateral tactics, prompting them to act preemptively to protect their economies. This shift is evident in the latest Treasury International Capital data, which reveals that countries such as Brazil, Ireland, the Cayman Islands, Canada, Norway, and India have significantly reduced their U.S. Treasury holdings over this 3-month period. Even traditionally strong investors like Japan and China, the two largest foreign creditors of the U.S., have decreased their exposure. While the reductions by Japan and China are relatively smaller in scale, they hold symbolic weight, indicating caution even among the most established holders of U.S. debt. A major factor behind these moves is Trump's hardline rhetoric and early executive actions. Within weeks of assuming office, he has reinstated tariff threats, re-examined trade agreements, and signaled a stricter stance on foreign investments in U.S. infrastructure and technology sectors. These actions have reignited fears of escalating trade disputes, directly affecting nations that depend on American markets or maintain significant financial ties with the U.S. economy.
Now, details of what could be the first action of President-elect Trump have just emerged from Washington, because Donald Trump has said he would impose a 25% tariff on goods coming into the US from Canada and Mexico, and an additional 10% on all Chinese imports, all on the first day of his presidency. Well, let's head to Washington to our North America correspondent Rowan Bridge, who is there. And Rowan, he talked about this a lot on the campaign trail, but he is pressing ahead, and those are sizable hikes in tariffs, aren't they?
At the same time, Trump's ongoing criticism of the Federal Reserve and his unpredictable fiscal policies have raised concerns among foreign investors who prioritize economic stability and institutional independence. With the U.S. national debt at record levels, Trump's proposed fiscal policies, including major tax cuts and increased defense spending, could further widen deficits. Foreign central banks and sovereign wealth funds tasked with long-term risk management appear to be mitigating uncertainty by diversifying their reserves away from U.S. Treasuries. Another key concern is financial weaponization. During Trump's previous tenure, the U.S. leveraged its control over the global financial system to impose sanctions and freeze assets, moves that advanced American interests but alarmed other nations. With Trump back in power, some governments are taking precautionary steps to reduce their exposure to U.S. jurisdiction entirely. This includes cutting reliance on dollar-denominated assets, increasing holdings in gold, euros, or the Chinese yuan, and reducing Treasury investments to minimize potential vulnerabilities.
What a tariff is, effectively, it's an additional fee onto any imports into the country, which means that any goods coming in from Canada effectively are going to cost 25% more. Now, some of that may be absorbed by the importer, but some of it might be passed on to the consumer, and the fear here is that ultimately what that means is higher prices for consumers in the shops.
It's interesting because when you read the detail of this, you would assume it's to do with trade or protectionism.
The fact that this coordinated sell-off coincided with Trump's return to the presidency is no accident. It is a direct reaction to the strategic and financial uncertainty that his leadership represents for many international actors. As of April 2, 2025, the United States is set to implement substantial reciprocal tariffs aimed at aligning tariff rates with those imposed by its trading partners on American exports. This shift, part of President Trump's America First strategy, is intended to address perceived trade imbalances and safeguard domestic industries by imposing equivalent tariffs on imports from countries that maintain higher duties on U.S. goods. Let's pause briefly. If you've enjoyed the video so far, we'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button. It helps us reach a wider audience, and your feedback in the comment section makes an even bigger difference. Thanks for watching. Now let's continue.
Well, 25 US companies have also been targeted in these retaliatory measures from either doing business in China or buying their products. Michael Pettis says until the global trade imbalances are addressed, this trade war will only escalate. Back to you.
These upcoming tariffs represent one of the largest import tax hikes in modern U.S. history. They aim to match or exceed the duties that other nations place on American products, effectively creating a level playing field for U.S. exporters. This policy is aligned with Trump's broader goal of reducing trade deficits and strengthening domestic manufacturing. The economic consequences of these tariffs are expected to be far-reaching. Domestically, while they are designed to protect American industries, they could also drive up costs for consumers. Products reliant on imported components or raw materials may see price increases, potentially adding to inflationary pressures. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has suggested that these tariffs could slow progress in lowering inflation this year, though he emphasized that the price effects are likely to be temporary.
As you see on the screen, the White House press briefing, and the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, just announced that President Trump is indeed planning to enact tariffs tomorrow. Here's what she said.
I was just with the president in the Oval Office, and I can confirm that tomorrow, the February 1st deadline that President Trump put into place at a statement several weeks ago continues. The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China.
Globally, the tariffs are expected to disrupt established supply chains and trade partnerships. Countries that depend on exporting goods to the U.S. may seek alternative markets or adjust their trade strategies in response. This shift could lead to a reconfiguration of global trade networks with long-term effects on international economic collaboration. The announcement of the U.S.'s forthcoming reciprocal tariffs, set to take effect on April 2, 2025, has already sparked strong reactions from key global trade partners. While some are still considering their options, others have already started enacting countermeasures, suggesting the early phases of what could develop into a broad trade conflict. The European Union has expressed concern over the sweeping scope of the U.S. tariff policy, describing it as a possible violation of World Trade Organization (WTO) rules and a threat to transatlantic economic cooperation.
The UK, Germany are actually up. Germany up by 12%, which is really striking, isn't it? And the UK up in positive territory as well, China too as well. So the US a real outlier when it comes to share prices. And it's all because people are looking at what are the next tariffs actually going to be. And the answer to that is right now it's aluminium and steel. Okay, so these are the next tariffs that are due to be coming in. Worth asking the question last time around, because there were these tariffs or similar tariffs imposed back in 2018. Last time, did they have an impact? Well, this is showing you US aluminium production, primary aluminium production. It did go up after those tariffs were imposed last time around. But then look, it came down.
EU Trade Commissioner Ingrid Lauren stated that while Europe is committed to preventing an escalation, it will not remain passive if European goods are unfairly targeted. The EU is expected to finalize its assessment by mid-April, after which it may implement a coordinated response, including tariffs on iconic American products such as motorcycles, whiskey, jeans, and agricultural goods. This strategy was successfully used during the 2018 US-EU trade dispute. With European elections approaching and political pressure mounting within member states, the EU's response will be carefully measured to protect its industries while maintaining diplomatic relations with Washington Washington. China, on the other hand, has already taken a more confrontational approach. Following the U.S. declaration, Chinese state-controlled media cautioned that America's economy would endure serious repercussions if the proposed tariffs were put into effect. The Global Times emphasized that imposing heavy counter tariffs was unavoidable. Staying true to this stance, Beijing has already imposed levies on U.S. agricultural products, specifically targeting soybeans, pork, dairy, and corn, commodities that originate from politically crucial swing states. Furthermore, China has stopped importing multiple American food and energy products and may soon broaden these restrictions to include aerospace components, automobiles, and technological parts.
According to economists, Trump's threatened tariffs would pose serious challenges to Canada's labor market, especially in trade-sensitive industries, which represent 2.4 million jobs, or roughly 12% of our total workforce. Research by RBC shows that jobs in energy-exporting Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and even Newfoundland and Labrador stand to be impacted. Manufacturing-focused provinces like Ontario and Quebec would see a big hit to their motor vehicle and parts industries as well as aerospace. Ontario Premier Doug Ford estimates the impact of blanket tariffs could cost the province 500,000 jobs.
The Chinese Ministry of Commerce has also suggested that legal action could be pursued at the World Trade Organization, WTO, and indicated the possible introduction of non-tariff obstacles such as stricter regulatory inspections and more rigorous customs clearance processes for American goods. These measures are part of a larger plan to put pressure on U.S. exporters and create deeper divisions within the American business sector, particularly among corporations that have significant financial interests in Chinese markets. Reacting to Washington's decision to introduce additional tariffs that are set to take effect on April 2, 2025, Canada has developed a set of strategic responses. The Canadian government has started a public consultation process to explore the possibility of implementing new counter tariffs on American imports. This initiative is designed to collect opinions on the proposed tariffs, which would affect approximately $125 billion worth of American goods. Through this consultation, stakeholders are given a chance to express their views on the potential consequences and effectiveness of such economic measures.
Obviously, Ford came out of that meeting quite positive in how he was talking, bringing up a lot of the talking points of, families argue. But it was really clear that the meeting wasn't going to bring any change to Trump's plan to slap Canada with different levels of tariffs. What Canadian officials later said was they really sat down and went through Donald Trump's trade agenda that he signed January 20th, which is all these reports that are going to come out April 2nd about how to deal with trade around the world.
To counterbalance the economic strain caused by U.S. tariffs, Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced a plan to dismantle internal trade barriers across Canada by July 1st. The objective of this policy is to establish a smooth and unified domestic market by eliminating federal restrictions, synchronizing regulations, and setting uniform national standards. Research suggests that reducing trade barriers within Canada could lower costs by up to 15% and contribute to economic growth of between 4% and 8%. Amidst intensifying trade disputes, Prime Minister Carney is expected to call for an early parliamentary election scheduled for April 28, 2025. This move is intended to reinforce the government's authority in dealing with the ongoing economic conflict and safeguarding Canadian sovereignty. Some industries are particularly susceptible to the impact of these tariffs, with American agriculture being one of the most affected sectors in this evolving trade confrontation. U.S. farmers are heavily dependent on global markets to sell their produce, with China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union playing a crucial role in agricultural trade. In 2023, the United States exported agricultural goods worth over $170 billion, with soybeans, corn, wheat, pork, and beef leading the way.
On assignment in Los Angeles tonight, but back home in Washington, President Trump in just the last 30 minutes has signed a new executive order that basically gives more power to Elon Musk and his Doge team. And boy, Musk, he was everywhere all at once today. There he is. You see him in the black hat there to the left, showing up at the first cabinet meeting of the Trump administration, dominating the discussion, tripling down on his plans to slash federal jobs, and admitting to some Doge growing pains.
If foreign governments impose retaliatory tariffs, particularly on agricultural products from politically significant states, American farmers could face major difficulties accessing global markets. For instance, China has already indicated its intention to reinstate punitive tariffs on U.S. soybeans and pork, mirroring similar actions taken during the trade war between 2018 and 2019. Should these tariffs be enforced, they would significantly weaken the competitiveness of American agricultural products overseas, causing surplus stockpiles in domestic markets. As supply builds up, prices would likely drop, negatively impacting farm revenues and putting additional financial strain on already struggling rural economies. Beyond direct exports, farmers are also confronting rising costs for essential equipment and materials. Tariffs on imported fertilizers, steel, and machinery components, many of which are sourced from countries like Canada, Germany, and Japan, are expected to drive up operational costs for agricultural producers. Smaller farms, in particular, may find it difficult to absorb these increasing expenses, potentially accelerating consolidation within the industry or even forcing some farmers to shut down entirely.
Where he talks all about how he will double the tariffs on steel and aluminium. This in response, he says, also to the very unfair anti-American farmer tariffs, which are on various US dairy products of up to 250 to 390%. That is a bit of a red herring because actually those extremely high tariffs only go on once a certain amount of dairy has been imported, and it hasn't reached that level in years.
The American automotive sector, which is deeply embedded in global supply networks, is also entering a period of considerable disruption. Car manufacturers and suppliers of auto parts have voiced concerns that levies on imported components, such as engines, electronic systems, and steel parts, will elevate production expenses. Industry analysts estimate that approximately 40% to 50% of the components used in an average vehicle are sourced from outside the United States, making the sector highly vulnerable to import restrictions. The increased cost of raw materials is expected to be transferred to consumers, resulting in more expensive new vehicles. Experts at the Center for Automotive Research predict that these new tariffs could raise the cost of a standard car or truck by anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000, depending on the proportion of imported parts used in manufacturing. This price hike could dampen consumer demand, especially in an economic environment where high interest rates have already made auto loans more costly.
Great to be with you, Carolyn. It is really an existential moment for Canada, and thank you for reporting on it.
Well, you've been vocal about the need for strong and precise responses to President Trump's tariffs. What does that look like in your opinion?
Well, we need to be united, strong, and smart. We need to recognize this is a critical moment for our country. We need to recognize that we can get through this and we can win, but we can only do that if we do the right things. So what I think we need to do today is publish a detailed retaliation list. It needs to be big, bigger than our retaliation ultimately will be. It should be $200 billion.
A potential drop in vehicle sales may also lead to job losses. The auto industry supports nearly 10 million jobs in the United States, spanning from factory workers and engineers to dealership employees and service technicians. If production volumes decline, layoffs could become a serious concern, particularly in Midwestern states such as Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, where the automobile sector plays a critical role in local economies. Additionally, retaliatory tariffs from major trade partners, including the European Union, Mexico, and South Korea, may specifically target American-made vehicles and automotive components. This could restrict export opportunities for U.S. manufacturers, severely affecting companies that have made substantial investments in international markets. Automakers like Ford, General Motors, and Tesla, which depend heavily on foreign sales for growth, could see significant setbacks in their global business operations. What are your thoughts on this issue? Share your opinion in the comments below. That concludes today's discussion. We genuinely appreciate your time and attention. If you found this content engaging or thought-provoking, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your participation is invaluable to us. You can also check out another one of our videos, which is now appearing on your screen. The world is pushing back, and the consequences could be massive. Will Trump's policies reshape the global economy, or is the U.S. headed for deeper financial turmoil? The coming months will reveal just how far America's allies are willing to go. If you found this analysis insightful, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into global politics. Let us know in the comments. How do you see this playing out?